Despite the immense popularity of Jujutsu Kaisen, there's actually a surprising lack of spin-offs, unless you count an undercooked arena fighter and a gacha game, with the only real spin-offs being the somewhat niche light novel duology. Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust, and Thorny Road at Dawn, both originally released in Japan in 2019, and later getting an official English translation in 2022, written by Ballad Kitaguni and with art by Gege of course. Each of the light novels cover original short stories set during the downtime in Season 1, allowing them to easily fit in the canon as well as fleshing out the cast a bit more, with some stories even telling untold events from Season 1 like Gojo's business trip. But are these novels any good, and why aren't they talked about as much? I guess to find out, we'll have to review both light novels. I was like, this is a video or something, whoa! But first, each of the light novels also have these really cool double-sided posters before the cover page, which unfold out into these pamphlets that are still connected to the book. So much for being a poster. One side has a textless version of the light novel's cover, and the other side having original art by Gege. There's also a section dedicated to the cast of characters, which differs in both novels and blurbs for both Gege as well as Ballad, which is a nice touch. Each novel isn't super long either, being just over 100 pages each, so you could definitely finish both novels in a day if you have enough free time and dedication. But without further filler, let's actually take a look at the Jujutsu Kaisen light novels, starting with Chapter 1 of Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust. That's a long name, this really is a light novel, my god. Our first story begins with the main trio exploring Tokyo on their day off, as Nobara goes to Amayaya Yokocho on her own to do some shopping, while Yuji and Megumi kinda just loiter around looking for something to do, as Megumi doesn't trust Yuji to explore the city on his own, in case he runs into a powerful cursed spirit or ends up switching with Sukuna accidentally, or even worse, picking up Takito's clothing. So together, they decide to go sightseeing in Akihabara, where they see such interesting sights as the maid cafe. This is what we call foreshadowing in the business. For now, the duo, and by the duo, I mean Yuji, get sidetracked and end up in an arcade with some interesting contradictions, like referring to Yuji as special grade, despite the fact this chapter most likely takes place sometime during the 2-week break at the end of episode 3, based on the fact that, spoilers, the next chapter in this light novel is set during the first Mu arc, and Megumi's reluctance to let Yuji explore the city on his own. Now, considering both light novels were translated by the infamous John Wary, if you know, you know, this very likely could be a mistranslation or flat out misinterpretation of this scene. There's also some smaller mistakes, like Yuji being referred to as a redhead, which, to be fair, these novels were originally written before the anime adaptation, so a set color palette probably wasn't widely accepted for the series yet. Or Sukuna being referred to as Suzuna on page 13, and only on page 13, which is obviously a typo then. But I still thought I should bring it up, because quality control. After an intense session of gaming, Yuji and Megumi notice Gojo playing and losing a crane game in the arcade, so the two decide to essentially stalk him for the rest of the day to get a better understanding of Gojo's personality, which leads to them finding out he likes crepes, and I mean really likes crepes, which is understandable, and it's further proof that Gojo truly is goated. Gojoted even. Throughout the day, they follow him into a vacuum tube shop, a music shop where he picks up a classical music vinyl, a gacha machine shop where he wins a hyper-realistic mushroom keychain, specifically a poisonous mushroom, an electronics shop where he uses a massage chair, a bookstore where he reads through a couple manga volumes, where Yuji buys a toy scouter, judging by the fact he says he can track Gojo's ki, which also proves even more that Yuji truly is one of the goats of all time if he fucks with Dragon Ball. He just like me, for real. However, this gang stalking comes to a turning point when they notice that Gojo has gone into a maid cafe. See, I told you it would be important. So being awkward teenagers, Yuji and Megumi can't decide whether they should keep pursuing him or just go home, until one of the maids working at the cafe beckons the two to come inside, which they do, utterly folding under pressure. Also kind of, but not really important to note, is that it's an angel-themed maid cafe. Was this Geke's way of foreshadowing Hana? Probably not. Inside the maid cafe, the two order a special umoris meal, which unbeknownst to our dynamic duo, also includes a free picture of one of the maids, which gives us unarguably one of Yuji's weirdest lines. Why did he phrase it like that? Although Megumi's description while taking a picture makes up for Guniji. Even better is that during all of this, Gojo was eating another crop from afar. Ultimately, pursuing Gojo ended up being a waste of time, as he ends up catching them outside the main cafe, although this time with Nobara, who calls out Megumi and Yuji for trailing Gojo the entire day. But as it turns out, the whole reason for Gojo being there in the first place was in search of a cursed spirit, as rumor has it, that a building next to the main cafe is haunted, and the cursed spirits that lurk there are agitated by records. So Gojo thought it would be the perfect opportunity for the trio to practice their curse techniques, even flashing back to the warehouse investigation from episode 3 due to the similarities in both training exercises, which is a neat callback given that Megumi wasn't allowed to participate in fighting that cursed spirit, unless it slipped to Nobara that both him and Yuji were at a maid cafe, which completely floors her due to how out of character it is for Megumi to go somewhere like that. Not Yuji though, which is kind of funny. Our first chapter comes to a close with the trio setting off to deal with the cursed spirit, when suddenly, the photo from the maid cafe blade falls out of Megami's pocket and lands at Gojo's feet, which ends with this honestly sweet moment of Gojo giggling at the photo, which thankfully was sketched out by Gege on the final page of chapter 1. Overall, I was honestly really impressed with the writing quality of this first chapter. Although it's a simple story, I honestly wish we had more moments of the main trio just hanging out like this prior to the Shibuya incident. So thankfully, this light novel scratches that itch in a way. Despite the fact that Gege isn't the one writing these novels, the characters are still true to form, with some great dialogue exchanges, even if Megami feels a little too much like Vegeta or Sasuke in terms of personality. But sure, he's supposed to be the series equivalent of that archetype, but I don't know, at times he just felt a little too off. Although it's only like once or twice, so it's not a huge deal. I also love the detail of Gojo's taste in food being a sugary mess. It's very in character. But again, a good start to the light novel duology. Let's see where chapter 2 takes us. As mentioned earlier, this chapter takes place during the fearsome Wu mark, and is actually the business trip Gojo mentioned in episode 5. With both Nanami and Gojo en route to Hokkaido to investigate a cursed user in the area, who after a butter potato pit stop, we find out is advertising a resurrection service, with the catch being that he can only resurrect babies. However, throughout this explanation from Nanami, we find out Gojo was kept in the dark by the higher-ups, but the only way Gojo was able to find out about this trip in the first place was through bugging Ichiji into spilling the tea. The sorcerer duo eventually travel underground to Sapporo on the trail of a cursed energy residual emanating from a baby, which turns out to be a dead baby transmogrified into a cursed corpse. Hence the chapter name, Resurrection Doll. Roll credits. However, despite the duo locating the Resurrection Doll, it takes them a while to convince a grief-stricken mother to let go of her deceased child, and focus on her actual living child, who's begging for her to leave the cursed sibling behind. Even if Gojo wasn't exactly the most sensitive in his reasoning, but it ended up working out in the long run. Honestly, this entire scene is, I don't want to say heartwarming, but more so pretty emotional, and is handled really well. So I won't go into full detail. Pick up the light novel yourself if you're curious, which I'd still highly recommend even after finishing this video. Despite it taking nearly the entire day, Nanami and Gojo eventually managed to give the mother closure, and took the cursed corpse into their custody to properly dispose of it at Jujutsu High. But with contraband seized, that leaves just one objective left: track down and apprehend the curse user behind this shady business. And while we never actually get the guy's name, Gojo dubs him as the doll maker, so let's go with that. It turns out the doll maker isn't a super strong Jujutsu sorcerer. In fact, he's weaker than the first tiers at the beginning of the series, but we're jumping the gun here. Gojo and Nanami stumble across a building hidden by cursed energy, and upon stepping inside, come face to face with the so-called doll maker, who appears to be nothing more than an old man dressed as a monk, with bandages wrapped around his fists that emit incredibly low cursed energy. However, instead of trying to combat the overpowered duo, the doll maker instead falls to their feet, crying for them to save him from his curse, when suddenly, an extra pair of arms rip out from the old man's sides, transforming to what is described as a mass of both flesh and dolls merged together, with small cursed corpses with the appearance of flies hovering around the hulking mass, which is just so fucking cool. Even with Mahito's ability to transmutate humans, we never really stumble into true body horror territory. Like, it's unsettling, don't get me wrong, but the Dollmaker's transformation, it's much more in line with something like John Carpenter's The Thing, which is just so cool. We even find out that the Dollmaker was using chunks of his own flesh to resurrect deceased babies, which just adds so much more layer to the true horror of his curse technique. However, despite the radicalness of this ability, the fight is over before it even truly begins, as Nanami whips out his blunt sword and cuts the Dollmaker in half from the shoulder down diagonally, utilizing his Raiju technique, after explaining his ability out loud for maximum damage, killing the Dollmaker in one hit. And during all of this, it's important to note that Gojo was watching the fight in the corner. Despite the Dollmaker being a complete lowlife, Nanami still feels remorse for killing the old man, resulting in a very sweet heart-to-heart moment between Gojo and Nanami over a few pints, where Gojo expresses his respect for Nanami's ability to shut out his emotions when necessary, but also maintain a very caring and human side despite the nature of their work. With chapter 2 coming to a close, as Gojo requests Nanami to train Yuji in secret over another round of non-alcoholic beers, as Gojo is a lightweight. Again, we're on a winning streak when it comes to the quality of these chapters. This one in particular having quite honestly some of the best characterization for Gojo. They really went hard with showing his softer side, like correcting Nanami for referring to Yuji only as Sukin's vessel, and of course with the star of the show being Nanami himself, who we get to see a much more softer side to as well. Just an overall banger no matter what angle you look at this chapter from. It's also pretty cool to introduce a new curse user, given how sparse they are in the main series. And even Even the idea of resurrecting people as cursed corpses is such an interesting concept that, again, I really wish we got to see in the main series. Like, imagine a Jujutsu sorcerer specializing in creating human cursed corpses during the Culling Games, or during the Shinjuku Showdown. My only complaint with this chapter, and it's not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but something about the way Nanami name-dropped the King of Curses here gave Major, what are we, some kind of Suicide Squad vibes. Honestly, don't know why, but something about that phrasing just kind of felt like a shitpost in a way. As you can probably guess by the name of the chapter, Allegory in Darkness is almost solely focused on Mahito, specifically his interest in human habits and how they affect the soul. We open with Mahito, Jugo, and Hanami wiping out a building of scammers to set up a new base of operations in Tokyo for Ghetto. However, to Jugo's dismay, Mahito isn't a big fan of the office's furniture and decides to dip and find his own hideout. Also, something that I didn't know until researching for this video is that Hanami is actually a guy despite his very feminine voice. I feel like that's a very overlooked aspect of early JJK. Maybe I'm just dumb and I'm missing something very obvious from the anime or manga. After a bit of a stroll through Tokyo, Mahito decides to set up base under a bridge that's connected to the sewers, where he finds a homeless man with burn marks around his eyes, indicating that he was blinded at some point. And to Mahito's surprise, is able to sense cursed energy, although according to the old man, he's not a Jujutsu sorcerer nor a curse user, but simply a regular human with innate cursed energy. Based off the old man's stoic nature and unique soul shape, Mahito decides to spare the old man and instead forge a friendship in order to learn more about how humans think and operate in day-to-day life. While we're never explicitly told how much time passes in this chapter, it seems that Mahito's new friendship lasts for at least a few days, as he sets up a hammock in his temporary base, as well as amassing a small collection of books, which allows him to bond with the old man, who we get lore for. As it turns out, the old man became blind as part of an insurance scam with his wife and best friend, despite already being well off, which went horribly wrong as his best friend and wife were secretly cheating behind his back, resulting in him eventually being kicked out of the house and becoming homeless, which led to him living by the sewer entrance. But despite all this, the old man never harbored a grudge against his best friend or wife, which fascinates Mahito even more as becoming blind allowed the old man to obtain a new sense of freedom. Being unable to see his surroundings with his eyes left him stranded in a never-ending void of serenity. Although despite his ability to sense cursed energy, his abilities are limited due to him only having innate cursed energy, being unable to tell a person or curse his physical appearance or gender by their curse energy or shape of their soul. It's honestly a fairly interesting take on a blind curse user that could have been cool if fleshed out more. However, one day on a literature supply run, Mahito debates where he should groom the old man into becoming a proper Jujutsu sorcerer or curse user when he overhears two rough-looking men loudly talking about them wanting to kill someone or something just for the fun of it. We unfortunately call this foreshadowing in the business. From the way the men are talking, Mahito immediately assumes they're full of shit and debates where he should transfigure them on the spot, but decides against it and heads home. However, by the time he gets there, he senses 3 souls at his base, with one soul slowly fading away. As it turns out, the punks from earlier stumbled across the old man in the sewers and decided to beat him to death. With Mahito staying beside the old man in his final moments, who was actually happy to have met Mahito, which honestly results in the most shocking moment in this novel, as Mahito actually begins to feel sadness and remorse after watching the old man die, resulting in him using idle transfiguration on both of the punks. Legit might be the craziest character development in this entire series. This evil son of a bitch actually felt sadness after watching someone die? Mahito? Don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. A valuable lesson from this light novel. We wrap up Allegory in Darkness with Mahito on his way to a familiar cinema, secretly dispersing the transfigured punks in the lobby before walking into a screening with a group of rowdy high schoolers, which is also the sketch for this chapter. Honestly, I'm completely floored by this chapter's ability to give Mahito, of all characters, somewhat of a conscience, and have it be effective without feeling insanely out of character. I was not familiar with Kudokane's game, my goodness. I also appreciate this chapter gives us insight to Mahito's fascination with books and movies, being a way for him to study humans and what makes them tick. It's something you don't really give a lot of thought to when watching season 1, at least for the first time. Again, Mahito's relationship with the old man was excellently handled and provides a lot of depth to his character. Favorite chapter so far, to be honest. Will the rest be able to top it? We drop back to the slice of life formula with Ichiji at work, as the focus of this chapter is Yuji watching Ichiji at work. What a shocker. We open with Yuji dying from the summer heat at Ichiji's apartment, as this chapter takes place in between episodes 6 and 9, as well as taking place during the events of Resurrection Doll, which we'll find out later in this chapter. Since this is Yuji's first time hanging out with Ichiji one-on-one, it's pretty awkward to say the least. We get some facts with Ichiji, like how the only TV he watches is the news and Rakugo. From my understanding, I mean a Google search, it's kind of like a traditional Japanese comedy show that tells a story with the narrator kneeling on a raised platform called a koza, and using a fan to aid them in acting out the characters in the story. Sounds pretty interesting. although Yuji has a feeling that Ichiji was lying about that last part to make him seem more relatable. Takada also gets name dropped and referenced multiple times throughout this conversation, which provides some neat world building in a way. After a while, Yuji falls asleep but is woken up by Ichiji, who's off to deliver some documents on behalf of Jujutsu High, so Yuji decides to tag along to get some fresh air. However, since Yuji is supposed to be dead at this point in the story, Ichiji insists he wears a disguise before heading out, and oh man, what a disguise it is. Surprisingly, the document submitting process contains the tiniest crumbs of world building, like how to the government and everyday people, Jujutsu High is designated as a religious school, or how most of Jujutsu High's documents are physical rather than digital. Didn't say it would be interesting crimes of world building. I also really appreciate this moment where Yuji feels some level of disconnect from Jujutsu society when he thinks about how the people Ichiji interacted with at the office unknowingly live on the edge of the so-called abnormal life. Goes a long way towards humanizing Yuji on a psychological level that we don't get to see in the main series. On the way home to Ichiji's apartment, he pulls over to answer a phone call from Gojo, who's still in Hokkaido with Nanami and needs to locate a window in the area, which is actually a new Jujutsu role introduced in this novel. Essentially, a window is an otherwise normal person, but with innate cursed energy that cooperates with Jujutsu High in locating cursed spirits and similar paranormal phenomena, kinda like Kuro or Siwu, even if Siwu kinda breaks the rule by not being affiliated with Jujutsu High, so I guess the proper term would be someone with innate cursed energy that gives tips to Jujutsu sorcerers. Although not to be confused with assistant managers like Ichiji and Nita, despite the similarities of the light novel's description of the role of windows in Jujutsu society. After taking note of the windows in Hokkaido, Ichiji calls Gojo back, only to get an earful in the process, as Gojo's ice cream had begun to melt while he was waiting, and also continues the trend of Gojo threatening Ichiji with a slap. I love that this gag manages to pop back up with these two. It also turns out that Gojo took the cursed corpse from episode 6 without Principal Yaga's permission, and needs Ichiji to return it without Yaga noticing. Gojo asking Ichiji if he can use the movies he bought for Yuji as a tax write-off is pretty funny though. As the two return home, the day turns to night thanks to Gojo's side quest, with Yuji jokingly saying that Ichiji is Gojo's errand boy, but admittedly feels bad for saying it when he doesn't reciprocate with laughter, leading to a pretty awkward conversation, immediately followed by a long pause of silence, which is broken by Yuji expressing his appreciation for assistant managers as a way to keep sorcerers grounded with the rest of humanity. Although this brief back and forth is also followed by a long, painful silence before Ichiji initiates the conversation by expressing his regret for allowing Yuji to die during the juvenile detention center investigation under his watch, which Yuji brushes off as no big deal since it all worked out in the end. However, this doesn't help with Ichiji's feelings of regret, as he expresses how he needs to do better, not as an assistant manager, but as an adult responsible for the well-being of teenagers, with even a small criticism of Jujutsu High thrown in. However, Yuji's reassurance the duo will get stronger together with time puts Ichiji at ease, bringing chapter 4 to an end, with Yuji and Ichiji deciding what they should eat for dinner that evening. While I don't think this chapter is necessarily bad by any means, I think it's pretty easy to acknowledge that this is definitely the lowest ranking chapter from this first light novel. While I appreciate the bonding between Yuji and Ichiji that we don't really get to see in the main series, I felt that the themes of staying connected to humanity could have gone a little deeper than being just 2 small paragraphs, given the potential of that concept. But other than that, this chapter is kind of a nothing burger to be honest, with the ending doing the majority of the heavy lifting. Although I do appreciate the more slice of life aspects that this chapter brings. Honestly, a slice of life series set after the end of Jujutsu Kaisen would kinda go hard, even if there's no chance that would happen. The random idol lore drop was unexpected though. Overall, not a bad chapter by any means, maybe like a 7 out of 10 at worst if I'm being completely honest. But now to conclude Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust with... God, that is a long-ass name even for light novel standards. Our final chapter opens with Yuji taking a leisurely stroll at night through the outskirts of Tokyo to avoid the possibility of accidentally bumping into someone from Jujutsu High in the city center or surrounding area of the school. Also important to note that this chapter takes place during the downtime between the Versus Mahito arc and Kyoto Goodwill event arc, which will become semi-important later on, mostly in the ending. During his Jujutsu stroll, he encounters a middle schooler alone in the swings, which is pretty strange considering it's 9 PM. So Yuji approaches the boy to see what's up. Also, Yuji's disguise from the previous chapter has leveled up from a pair of sunglasses to blonde hair. Although he's still wearing his school uniform, which kinda throws the disguise part out the window, and he's also not covering his face. So great disguise. As a brief introduction, we learn the boy's name is Kairi Minato, and that his grandmother passed away the year prior, who raised him and named him after the romantic view associated with the ocean. However, the reason Kairi is sitting out alone at night is that he can't go home because of a supposed demon the size of a beach ball guarding his house. Putting 2 and 2 together, Yuji assumes that the boy is talking about a cursed spirit, so he offers to walk home with Kairi to exorcise the curse. house. Upon entering the cursed spirit's range, it cries out mom at Yuji and Kairi before yelling try again. Also, the description of the cursed spirit is really cool. Definitely one of the strongest aspects of this novel. Seeing Yuji's fist light up with cursed energy, the so-called demon responds by launching itself in front of the moon's view and slamming back down towards Yuji on the ground, who successfully dodges out of the way and manages to exorcise the demon with one strike from Divergent Fist. Filled with gratitude, Kairi gives Yuji a few bows before heading in home, although Yuji takes note of how Kairi's facial expression didn't change despite its many thanks. Foreshadowing! Woo! A few days pass, and Yuji ends up at the neighborhood again during one of his late-night strolls, where he meets Kairi sitting alone in the swings, which raises an immediate red flag, and upon dead sprinting back to Kairi's house, he finds the demon alive and well, despite pummeling the low-level curse just a few nights earlier. Using the exact same ground pound against Yuji, who responds with another Divergent Fist that seemingly exorcises the demon, but despite doing so, he's still able to sense his cursed energy lingering in the area, which is followed up by the revelation from Kairi that no matter what, the demon will return to protect the house. Feeling defeated, Yuji turns to Gojo for aid in exorcising the demon the following day, only to be turned down and met with the harsh truth that he shouldn't be relying on strong sorcerers to directly fix his problems. Instead, advising Yuji to reflect on why the demon won't leave the house's perimeter, and after trial and error, he comes to the conclusion that the demon respawning must be linked to Kairi or his family's negative emotions. Again, when it comes to close emotional scenes, this novel does not miss, even paralleling the current situation to Junpei's unfortunate circumstances from the previous arc, and is followed by another sketch from Gege. At first, Yuji stops by Kairi's house to look for him, but is informed by his adopted mother that he hasn't been home in a while, and to explain for him constantly sneaking out at night. After a couple of follow-up questions, Yuji discovers that the demon is actually from a story that Kairi's grandmother told him when he was younger, about how a demon would visit the homes of children who are being bold, akin to a Namahage, which is the demon from traditional Japanese folklore that visits homes during New Year's celebrations to scare misbehaving children into obeying their parents, which is particularly important in the context of this chapter. After a while, Yuji meets Kairi in the park and tells him that he must return home to exorcise the demon for good. However, after a heart-to-heart conversation, we learn that Kairi sneaks out at night because he feels like he's a burden on the Okazaki family, as they took him in as their son after the passing of his grandmother due to them being close friends in the neighborhood. After some convincing, Yuji manages to get Kairi to follow him back home, only to find that the demon has grown from the size of a beach ball to that of a station wagon, roughly 5 or so feet by the way, as a response to Kairi's growing fear of the demon hurting the Okazaki family, which causes his fight or flight to kick in and turn tail, only to be brought back to reality by his shocked mother pleading for him to come back. Taking advantage of the chaos, Yuji swiftly takes down the demon with one last Divergent Fist, bringing an end to the cyclical nightmare. Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust comes to a close with Kairi crying in his mother's arms and thanking Yuji for exorcising the demon. As Yuji sees the family off, he notices the demon's head on the ground, giving a smile before fading into the night, with Yuji interpreting the demon's final moments as Kairi's grandmother looking over him from beyond the grave, which reminds Yuji of his last moments with his own grandfather, giving Yuji the resolve to finally face Megumi and Nobara after 2 months of absence. With the final moments of this first novel being Yuji reflecting on how Megumi and Nobara must have felt after discovering he died during the detention center investigation. Honestly, a very fitting way to end Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust, even though this novel had nothing to do with Autumn in the end. Similarly to Resurrection Doll, this chapter's strengths are with its cursed spirit description and emotional beats, although I would argue that Resurrection Doll had slightly higher highs. But the cyclical nature of the demon's technique really helped it to stand out from not only other cursed spirits, but cursed techniques in general, and is also held by both the demon and Yuji responding with the exact same moveset night after night. Yuji bleaching his hair though was an interesting choice for disguise. Seriously couldn't have combined the glasses with the blonde hair? Okay. This chapter's highest quality though was Yuji still reeling from Junpei's death in the previous arc and finding a way to move on by assisting Kairi with his family's problem. Genuinely really great writing, which thankfully I can say about this entire novel. Every character felt true to form except debatably Guro. The new villains introduced felt incredibly unique despite their minuscule numbers. The new side characters had overall great and consistent writing, and the character development honestly went a long way towards deepening the bonds between the main cast, which is something that felt noticeably absent in the main series, particularly before the Shibuya incident, which is an itch that this novel was able to scratch with satisfaction. My only complaint is that I wish Megumi and Nobara had more of an active role outside of chapter 1, but perhaps 20 Road at Dawn will deliver upon that criticism. However, before we move on, let's first rank the chapters of Summer of Ashes, Autumn of Dust, with with 5 being the worst, although worst in this context is like a 7 out of 10, and 1 obviously being the best. Starting with Ichiji at work, this chapter is heavily carried by its ending, and again, just kind of felt like a nothing burger of a chapter, but I appreciate Ichiji's development and the crumbs of world building. Kyujitsu Kaisen, we need more stories than just the main trio hanging out, given the surprising lack of it in the manga. Again, kinda wish Nobara had more to do as at the ending, and Megami felt more fraudulent than normal. Although there is some certified Jujutsu Kaisen funny moments throughout for all. Let's never speak of Guniji Jelkadori again though, I think it's for the best. Honestly, these last two are really difficult to order thanks to the sheer quality of each chapter, but I'm going to have to put an Illusory Trek to the Guardian Demon at number 3, as a Resurrection Doll just kinda executes its main story beats a lot better. Although I will give major props for showing the toll the versus Mahito arc had on Yuji's mental health, as well as his isolation from Megami and Nobara, plus a generally interesting series of fights to boot. Allegory and Darkness honestly shocked me with how great it handled Mahito's friendship with the old man, and somehow even managing to humanize him to some extent, leaving Resurrection Doll as my personal favorite chapter from Summer of Ashes Autumn of Dust, primarily thanks to just the concept of the doll maker alone, and how Gojo and Nanami's friendship was portrayed. Genuinely some all-time bangers here, I'm impressed. Finishing this light novel really impressed me with Kitaguni's ability to write the JJK cast, and still make it feel natural to Gege's typical writing. However, for now, we must put Thorny Road at Dawn's review off until another day, as I really wasn't expecting to talk about Summer of Ashes Autumn of Dust for this long. So, to be continued until next time.